Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Talking to Artists. So I cannot believe it, but today is our 50th episode. So I'm actually kind of shocked that I was able to continue this every week for 50 weeks. And I'm also a little bit shocked, but very thankful that I continue to run into people that are interested in giving up an hour of their time and being my guests, which I really, really appreciate it. And so as always, if you have artists that you have run into that you would love to hear from, I would really love that. So coming up after today, we've got Hanan Fayed, and she does this beautiful glasswork. Really don't know her, but I've seen her work and I love it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how she creates her work. And after that, we've got Paula White Diamond, who is going to talk about that duality of being an artist and finding her own artist voice while also running a really successful gallery, beautiful gallery. And so she's going to talk about that. And after that, we've got Gortzman is coming on, and they're going to probably just showcase some interesting and new products that are out there. So I think it'll be really interesting for artists to kind of see what's going on and how it's happening. So today, for episode 50, we're going to do a little bit about how to prepare for an outdoor show. Now, I appreciate that we may be in a situation where we're not doing a lot of outdoor shows, but a lot of the same principles apply in terms of preparation, planning your marketing, knowing what you're getting into, and try and plan for all of those surprises that are going to happen. So unlike most of my podcasts, and normally the reason I don't kind of address comments when I'm talking to a guest is, first of all, I find it breaks my concentration, and I like to really be a really engaged listener and really listen to what the person's saying. This will be a little bit different. Angela is gonna come on board, and we're going to go through things like the plan, your tents, your marketing, your elevator pitch. We'll try and get us through as much as we can in an hour. So if you do have questions, put them in the chat, and I will kind of remember them and either answer them, address them directly, or else if I know it's coming up in the next little while, then we'll kind of address them. So one more quick thing is I am very slowly uploading these podcasts to Spotify and Apple Podcast. And so please bear with me. Some of the sound quality of the early ones is really not great, but I think I'm just going to kind of run with them because otherwise it takes 6 or 7 hours to edit the ums and ahs and noise out of them. So anyway, I've just uploaded, Marjolines and Michelin Roy, who is a jeweler. Jane Lynn James is coming up probably in the next few days, and I'm going to try and do 2 or 3 a week to kind of get caught up to where we are now. Anyway, enough babbling, because I know you really want me to bring on Angela so that we can chat. Everything you need for outdoor shows. And hopefully my Wi-Fi works. Hopefully her Wi-Fi works. Hey, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you, Kate?
Oh, I'm good. We have a gorgeous day here finally. It's been so rainy and kind of depressing.
Yeah, the sun's shining here too. I almost thought, oh, should I go outside? So
I know. I almost did that too. I thought, no, you know what'll happen? I'll be out there happily gardening. I completely forget I'm supposed to be here at 11. So, welcome to the 50th episode.
wow.
Isn't that cool? I know. Yeah, so in 2 weeks it'll be, like 1 full year we'll be doing this. I never would have imagined when I first started that I'd actually have the perseverance to do this for a year.
Well, I mean, I think it was a great thing you started this during COVID when we had a hard time connecting with people. And we're online a lot, so it's a nice thing to be able to, like, once in a while open up a podcast, listen to it, see what other people are doing. It's been interesting listening to all your guests.
Yeah, I think and it's interesting now because I'm getting into guests that I don't know as well. So at the beginning I just had friends because then it was a nice easy interview, you know. But now I've got people that I don't know, and I don't know about their process, and I'm finding that quite fascinating too.
Awesome.
But anyway, we should jump right into the art. We have so much to talk about. So basically, how to do an outdoor show. And for people who don't know, Angela is the event director for Riverdale Art Walk in the Square. She also manages Leslie Grove Gallery for us, and so is very involved in kind of the shows and the jurying. But most importantly, once the artists get excited and you're super excited you got into the show, and now you're like, oh my God, what do I need to do to make it successful? So that's what this part's about. And we normally do an orientation for each of our outdoor shows, so some of this is going to be pulled from that. But I think it'll be pretty much applicable to any outdoor show you're doing. We will maybe touch a little bit on digital since a lot of the shows are online, but I think I don't want to jam so much in that we don't actually provide any useful kind of information. So. Right.
Yeah.
So
those who are interested in learning more, we are doing orientations for our specific shows. This will be more general are doing other orientations throughout the summer.
Yeah, and I believe Toronto Outdoor also does a boot camp and stuff like that. But this is interactive, so you can ask questions. So where do we start? I guess we start at the beginning. We're having some sort of an idea of a plan, which usually involves a tent.
A tent, that's right. Yeah, so I guess the interesting thing is now is the time when you need to, if you are doing any shows later on this summer, now is the time to think about renting those or purchasing one. I know that a lot of people do rent, and there's an ease to that because people just you and you just kind of show up at your booth. But again, you know, there are options for purchases as well. For our particular shows, for the art walks, all cargoes, we aren't doing in person at the at Jimmy Simpson Park, but we are actually still helping to manage rentals with them. So you can still rent from some of these companies, even though they're not doing these big shows. So if you're doing these pop-ups in places, you can give these people a call, like all cargoes, and they'll be happy to rent you a tent.
Yeah, so the benefit of that is that you kind of show up in your space and the tent is hung. Like the grids and stuff are not there. You still have to figure your hanging system. For me, I'm kind of a control monger, so I like to know exactly what I'm getting into. So I have my own tent, which I bought, God, 12 years ago now, never expecting it was going to last this long. And so therefore I can control all of the elements of my booth and my space and my waterproofing, and that for me just takes away some of the stress, whereas other people find that part stressful. So it's nice to be able to rent. So it's good to have the option.
Yeah. So I just bought my first tent. So I think I'm sort of like that too. I'd rather have my own, and I know what I'm dealing with. I can waterproof it ahead of time. So if you do have a tent, that's something you need to do annually, is you need to spray down your tent so that you can at least reflect the water as much as possible. They're not waterproof, but it's important to treat them every year.
Yeah, so I buy, I think it's a Coleman's, actually, a tent waterproofer, so that you would use for canvas tents and stuff, especially those old Egyptian cotton ones. So I always make sure I do the top twice. I do the walls, but I kind of do a lighter one because usually the rain doesn't come in sideways. It has, but usually it doesn't. And then the other thing I always have in my kit is white duct tape. So if worst comes to worst and you get a tear or something in the middle of the show, you can kind of stick some white duct tape on the top and it doesn't look too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing with tents is that, you know, they are not really designed for heavy rainpour. And so there's a couple things that are really important to keeping the rain off the tent. So one of the ways to stop them from collecting is to stop the water from collecting into the peaks. And so we have our trusty pool noodles for that.
Yeah, or hula hoops. People use hula hoops as
Yeah.
well. I think pool noodles are easier to store. So I think that's what buy those. But pool noodles, actually, they have quite a good bounce, and they stay very sturdy, so they work as well. So you want to put those into each of the corners. Some people put 4 up, some people put 6 up, depending on the frame, the way your tent top is sort of structured.
Yeah. And yeah, what that really does is, and I like to color coordinate my pool noodles with my art. Not everybody has to do that, but they're super cheap and they will save you a ton of stress and worry. So what ends up happening is you actually just put them into the corners and tuck them into the frame. And what that does is it keeps the roof of the tent, which especially after a couple of years gets kind of saggy, from kind of sagging where the rain can collect. The rain just tends to wash off. So that is a pretty critical thing to do.
Yeah. So it just keeps it taut, because otherwise what happens is the water pools like this and you're out there poking it to get the water to pop off, and you're constantly doing that. So that's a really good point. Yeah. So
other good point, I just want to interrupt for that, because Laurie Scantos almost killed me at my first show that rained, and I was doing that and wasn't really thinking about the fact that as I was pushing the water off of my tent, I was actually putting it right into her tent.
Yeah.
So just be really careful you don't do that, because that's not a good way to make friends. Sorry?
Yeah. So if you do have neighbors, build this year, but if you do have neighbors, make sure the area is clear before you do that. I've seen that many times at shows. People pop the water off and someone's got art on the ground, especially during setup the second morning. People at their tents and other people are setting up, and I saw someone flood framed pieces. It was terrible. But,
oh, it's so sad. I know when you hear that, you're like, oh, and you feel so badly. So try not to do that. So I think one of the important things, though, is obviously is that planning ahead of time. Like Ange said, now's the time you need to be planning for not only your tent, but your hanging system and your pricing and your work you're going to put in there. So where should we kind of go next? I guess part of the plan too is, I just wanted to say, which is really important as organizers, is make sure you read all the communications from the show organizers. There's so much information there, and there's so much important information in terms of load in and load out and what the rules are. Are you allowed to have a tent that's not white? Do you have to have a tent that's white? That alleviates a lot of the issues right there. So it's really important to kind of read all that stuff and give people the courtesy, the organizers the courtesy of doing that when there's been a lot of work put into them.
Pretty much every show has a handbook, and it's usually there what the requirements are, or if they're working with a rental company, and so on. So I think that is a really good point. Yes, please read your stuff.
Yeah. And somebody's just saying they're just thinking about doing an outdoor show. So for me personally, as an artist who's been showing professionally for about 12 years now, and I do probably upwards 20 to 30 shows a year normally, obviously not this year, but I find that they are an incredible way to really connect and meet with people in a really casual environment. So if you're kind of on the fence of not doing an outdoor show because you're concerned about all this setup in the tent in the rain, all that stuff is manageable and you can kind of deal with it. But I think the benefits you get from doing an outdoor show, which tends to be in a very, like a community kind of environment, is really, really positive. So.
Yeah, I think that not only just from the guests looking at your work, but also from other artists, like we all feed off of each other. And I think there's just this atmosphere that like, it's just a really great event where it's focused on art. And I think it's just a very lovely opportunity. I guess if you don't show at a show, I mean, make sure that you're going out to them, right? And engaging with the public, because I think that that's just a really great opportunity.
Yeah, and you're right. You do get to build your artist network too. Like one of the, especially I can just imagine the first outdoor show we're going to do after sort of 2 summers of being closed due to COVID is just going to be such a pleasure to kind of hug all your friends again and sort of see what they're up to and see what the work is like. But I think you can't underestimate the power of that artist network community too, which is kind of pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's a great place to make new friends as well. Like I always say, make friends with your neighbors, whether you know them or not. Like make good friends with them.
Absolutely.
Especially at an outdoor event, when you're relying on each other, I think it creates great bonds, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and especially like I usually do my shows by myself. And so it's a lot to kind of, like set everything up. And sometimes you have big pieces you need a hand with. But the other reality too is sometimes you just need a bit of a bio break, and it's nice to be able to ask your neighbor to watch your tent, but that it gets to the point where they have at least an understanding and they can do your spiel a bit if there's someone there who's interested versus, sometimes there's always volunteers around. I personally like to have an artist look at my tent if they happen to be there.
Right.
So, okay. So next tactical thing is, I guess, how to hang your work. And there are about 400,000 different options for this.
I think it's kind of difficult to do this without kind of showing imagery and stuff. So I think maybe we go over this very quickly, but there are tons of different ways to hang work, and people will use like the old-fashioned way of chains, which I think is very difficult sometimes to level, right? So you're fussing with your work. I think what you want to do is think about how you're hanging your work to make it the easiest, so that you can focus on connecting with people and not fussing, right? That's really like, you want to just focus on selling your work and talking about your work and connecting with people and building your audience. So the less you have to do with all that stuff, the better. So I guess, and then you have to think about what kind of work you're presenting. So whether it's really big or whether it's small, so like if you have big work, it's okay to have grids or something that have like big wires or whatever, because you don't have to be that fussed. But if you have a lot of small work, it's really difficult to lay that all out in a really nice format on really big grids. So you can rent fencing, you can rent grids, you can purchase grids, you can actually just make like wood slats and hang pieces on those. There's people do all different things. So I would say, if you haven't been to a show, when you go to a show, look at how people are hanging their work. If you're an artist and you're interested in that, check out other shows. If you're going to have a show this year and you haven't had the opportunity to check out other shows, we are doing an art walk in a Riverdale Art Walk orientation, and we'll show imagery of different ways to hang. Kate,
probably the most common one. I mean, I started off with chains because that was what was recommended to me, and it's super cheap. I found the challenge was the least bit of wind, you've got these paintings that are moving all over the place, which, my work's got kind of a lot of stuff going on, so I found it was a bit like, well, too much. And then probably the second most popular are white or black grids. Well, I prefer the white because I think it looks nicer with the tent, back of the tent. And that's not too bad because at least you can kind of line everything up. And right now, I think both Angela and I have, we've invested in the Flourish mesh system, which basically is a mesh wall you can just stick everything into, which I love. And if you're doing more than a few shows a year, I think it's totally worth it. It's easier to carry, it's lighter. You have so much flexibility on how you show, and it looks really professional, which is nice.
Yeah, yeah, I think they're awesome. Like I've seen so many
Yeah.
hanging systems, and when I decided to do outdoor shows, it's like I bought it right away. Like I haven't done well, I've done like small outdoor shows, but I haven't had my own booth yet. And I bought it right away because I figure you like
Yeah.
go home, go, you might as well just do it, right? Like just get the wall. But again, it's pretty expensive and it's not necessarily affordable for everybody. And if you don't know you're going to continue to do shows, there are lots of other options, right? A lot of people
Yeah.
that are very light to carry. They just and they just cut slots in them and they just hang pieces on. If you are worried about wind when you have like grids and fencing, you can always zip tie on. I think that's another important part to say about hanging your work. It's not just what you're hanging on, it's how you're hanging it. So if you normally have your work and it's wired, if you're able to, depending if it's wood or not, it's best to put D-rings in the corner because then it actually keeps it level. You can do both sides of the piece and you can
Yeah.
both sides, so it'll keep it level. But also, whether you have the wired or the D-ring, you can zip tie it on. Like if you know it's going to be windy and you know you're going to have issues, you can just zip tie it on because it's pretty easy to clip those off. And that way,
Yeah.
your work is less likely to fall or bang off.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. These shows do go rain or shine or wind or almost tornado, which we've done some these things in. So it's important to kind of be organized. The one thing I would just say with zip ties, because that's again lesson learned, don't zip tie them too tight because they're just really hard to clip off at the end of the day. I put D-rings on all of my stuff in the top corners, and then when someone buys them, I just remove the D-rings. So that's kind of usually what I do. I think the other thing to remember though is that just because you have a system now doesn't mean that's the system you have to have for life. Like use something, try it, see if it works for you. For some people I've seen they use chains, it works perfectly because they put 3 big pieces of art in their booth and they're totally fine. And then just kind of experiment a little bit. And it'll never look as great as it's going to look in a gallery wall, and that's the reality of outdoor shows, and I think people understand that. So I think just try and make it as neat as you can, and just then at that point, just like Ange says, focus on the people, focus on the work, focus on the selling, and less about the look.
Yeah. One thing I did want to point out is just because you have one hanging system on one wall, you don't have to have the same hanging system on another wall. I've seen
Yeah.
intermix them. So what I was saying with the grids, and if you're doing a rental and you're going to have fencing or you're going to have grids, you could have that for some big pieces. Then you could actually you could attach to, if you had fencing, you could attach a sheet of wood, paint it, and then you could put nail holes in it or nails, and then you can just hang small little pieces on it. So I've done that. I've seen people do that. Like they do strips of wood and they actually nail to put little pieces on because then they can put more pieces on. Because with the grids, I just want to point out that they're sometimes quite wide, and then if you have small pieces, it's hard to make it look cohesive and straight and appealing, I guess. You see a lot of
Yeah.
around the pieces of art, and it's a bit distracting. So
Yeah. So the other thing is I think it's really important is to kind of understand your work and how it hangs together. So for my work, it's got a lot of color and a lot of energy. So I'm very conscious about creating a very structured grid pattern when I hang my work. Otherwise, if I've got random hangings with random colors and random shapes, it just becomes too much. And so it doesn't become very invitable for people to come in. And it's important not to overhang your grid. I see that a lot with especially artists that are just starting because they're like, I want to put everything out there because first of all, I love everything I'm doing and I don't want to have miss the opportunity that someone's going to walk past my tent and that one piece that they're going to love and buy isn't going to be there. The challenge is it's hard for them to decipher and sort of separate that one piece from all the other stuff you have. So you do yourself a favor and be like, wasn't it Coco Chanel that said, get dressed and put your accessories on and then take one piece off before you go out the door, like pare it down a little bit and do some editing and your booth will look better and you'll sell more.
yeah, and if you do have some variety, some people like, so for me, I did do a show last year and some of my pieces I frame in barnwood. So what I did is instead of just having those throughout and having that kind of your eye structured or whatever, I put that on an outside wall in one zone. So that it's like, yes, you can, this is my work. And if you want to frame it, or here are some pieces that are framed with barnwood, because though I think it marries really well as an overall display, it could be somewhat distracting. And so I chose to kind of separate that. And one thing I just want to say in planning your booth this year, and if you've done lots of show, one thing you should think about is the flow, because we will assume we have a lot of COVID restrictions and we want people to feel comfortable coming into our booth and have flow through our booth. One thing I would say, the way that we would be doing our art walks is we would require people not to have a back wall, which means that people can
Right.
walk through so no one gets stuck into this channel where they're uncomfortable. I don't know if other shows or pop-up areas are going to have that, but we recommend that. I would recommend that to all artists, to not showcase on your back wall. So if you are going to, this might be the year to have chains, because if you are going to have the back wall open, maybe you still hang your sign, but maybe you hang one bigger piece at the back wall that's loose, but still allows people to go in and out of your booth. Or if you had like,
Yeah.
you have like one grid, you kind of put it at the corner at the back wall, but really, I would suggest that we have flow. You have flow through, and then
A door at the back. Yeah.
one thing people always forget to find out is, are there outside walls exposed during a show, or can it be featured during a show? And I would think that with the COVID restrictions, booths are going to have to be spread out much further. I know that that's what we would do with our art walks, is there won't be somebody right beside you, which means you'll have these outside walls. So you have to think about your display a little bit different during these times.
Mm-hmm. And also, if you have an outside wall, please don't waste it. Like I see, so often where people haven't really either considered they have an outside wall, and so they don't hang anything on the outside. And it's such a lost opportunity because people can see your work. I've done this in, I think it was an Ottawa show, and I was just watching this woman, and I could see her from, I don't know, 50 feet away, and she saw the piece that was hanging on my outside back wall, and she just beelined towards it. And it's kind of like, that's the reason that you hang on all of your walls. And especially if you are concerned you don't have enough work, spread it out, provide some breathing space. And I think, what Angela says is really important, is creating a doorway at the back. Now, normally, under normal circumstances, you would not necessarily have to do that. And that's usually where I would put my biggest, strongest, most eye-catching piece at the back of my booth. And often I'll just have one, maybe two pieces at the back. Like the back of the booth is pretty spare and it's pretty dramatic, and it's kind of designed to draw people in. And then you have your smaller pieces. Like I usually put my smaller pieces at the front of the tent, so as people are walking by, I can kind of catch their eye. So, and I find,
Yeah,
I don't know,
that
for
makes
me,
sense. Yeah.
I often put a turquoise one, but orange seems to be definitely a color that people are afraid to buy, but they seem to want to come in and look at it. I don't know why. So I will often put something that's quite strong visually in the back. And so I also, and I'm not a huge planner, even after doing so many shows, but I do find that it's really, because especially at an outdoor show, you don't have a lot of storage. So
Yeah.
although you do want to
I
have
think
extra stuff in case you sell, you don't want to have so much extra work there because you can't really pile it up against the tent. It looks crappy, and it's also, the tent doesn't really support the tent's walls. So what I do is I actually use an Excel spreadsheet, and I map out 1 square inch is 1 foot, and I kind of plan all of my pieces and where they're going to go, what the grids are going to look like. And I find that helps me tremendously. So I kind of, first of all, know, and you should be doing that kind of now or in the next few weeks. And so therefore I would kind of say, okay, I want a set of 4 12 by 12s here. I only have 2. I need to do at least 2 more to fill the grid, plus 2 more to fill, if I sell or whatever. Like, sort of, you start to paint for your plan. I guess that's what I would do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess that's to another point for these shows. What you want to do is have different sizes of work because you're appealing to different audiences. Not everybody's going to be able to afford your big piece, your big, beautiful pieces. So you want to make sure that people can have starter pieces. So they might buy a small piece to start, and then they become part of your network and maybe follow you, and maybe hopefully buy again from you. And so what you want to is have introduction pieces, which are smaller pieces at a show, as well as some medium-sized pieces. And that's why I think it's important to kind of grid that out and figure out how you would display that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a friend of mine calls my little 6 by 6 inch treasures my gateway drugs because a lot of people will buy those and then they will kind of gradually go move up. And I think, it's, you may not sell your largest piece there, but you've also had the opportunity to show it to a lot of people. People will take pictures of it. And so it's important kind of to do that. And it's important to make sure that your pricing makes sense across the board with all those pieces too. Like you want something at different price points, but you also want them to be kind of logical as you're kind of working through from large to small. One of the psychological benefits about having one large piece at the back is that that piece is going to be the most expensive. And there might be a bit of sticker shock at that price, but what it does, it helps anchor your pricing so that when they look at smaller pieces, then they can kind of see that it's a much better deal.
Yeah.
Oh, did we lose you a bit?
Well, and I guess that's
Or,
one.
oh.
I don't know if it's me or you, Kate. It's
Okay.
probably me, but I'm okay now. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So I'll just mention that again because I think it's really important. So having a large piece at the back of the booth tends to be your most expensive piece. And what that does is it anchors your pricing. So from a psychology point of view, people have a bit of sticker shock sometimes when they kind of go, oh my God, that painting's $4,000 or $3,000 or whatever. What it does do is it kind of sets, that's the price of the artist, which means now that $1,000 piece and that $500 piece looks like a much better deal in comparison. And so what it does for you is it helps you to be able to justify, and people can understand the $1,000, $500 price pieces. So that's called anchoring. And so it's kind of important to have that really large piece that's expensive. And you probably don't sell it. Maybe you do sell it. That would be amazing. But if you don't, it doesn't matter because it's done its job.
Right, right. Well, done two jobs, drawing people in and then
Mm-hmm.
pricing, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. And if you sell it, that's great. So then you have to figure out what are you going to put in that space because I don't typically bring a lot of extra large ones. I tend to bring extra smaller ones.
yeah, so this is one way that the outdoor shows are a little bit different than a gallery show, I think, that you're kind of presenting kind of different levels of work. Not that you would never have small pieces in a gallery show, but you'd more likely have more small pieces at an outdoor show, right?
Yeah,
That are
yeah, I agree. And the other difference too is typically at an outdoor show, if someone buys it, you want them to take it. Like I don't, if it's a really big piece and you're delivering it, that's a little bit different. But I'm a huge fan of, you've bought it, you take it. I'm putting something else up on the wall that I can sell.
yeah.
So, and that brings up the question of red dots, which comes up a lot. Should you red dot the work you sell or should you not? Being a student of psychology, I believe that absolutely you should put up the dots. People like to buy from people who are selling. I think that helps that success. And so I usually run mine down the side of my tent.
Yeah, I would say yes, do that. The way that I see it is if people are selling, they're going to sell more. They have red dots, like usually is what
Yeah,
happens for shows.
yeah,
People
I
buy
agree.
that. Yeah, so
Yeah, so
don't be afraid of that.
yeah, and I think that I think the important part too is to kind of remember you have to, it's almost like, your job as an artist when you're at the outdoor show is kind of done. The work is produced and it's beautiful and it's framed and it looks lovely. So now you kind of have to take your artist hat on and put a little bit of your salesman hat on. And I'm not saying you can sell art. I don't think you can really sell it. But what you can do is you can help kind of navigate those conversations and help people understand your process well enough that they kind of connect with you personally as an artist because that's why they're there, is to meet the artist. And then really try and move the work and replace it. And, if you find that one piece is getting a lot of attention, you can shift your booth sort of the second day or something like that.
Yeah, so Gail's just asking, do you replace sold work or do you leave the space open? I would say replace it. You want to showcase your work and you want to sell more work. I just say like if you have, and especially if you spent a lot of time figuring out your booth, if you have another replacement piece for that size, I would put a piece in there and sell it.
Yeah, I think the only time I would not replace it is, I guess, if it's at the very end of the show. Sometimes you get into a bit of a feeding frenzy at the end of the show where they've been looking for the whole weekend and finally they're coming back to buy and it's like, 10 minutes before the show ends. Obviously, probably not going to. But I don't think that psychology works unless you truly have nothing else to replace it with. Like I would always replace it because it looks nice and clean and neat. And that's one of the other reasons that you have the red dots. So people know that the reason the booth is full isn't because you haven't sold anything. You have sold, but the booth is full because you've got more work because you are an artist and that's what you do. You produce work.
Right. And I think, I guess that's important too, because your layout might change. I know that I did a show last September and I sold quite a few pieces of work that first day. So I actually rechanged my entire layout. That night, I just sat down and I thought about, well, what pieces do I have left to make it look a little bit more appealing again, because it was starting to look smaller pieces and nothing's really laying out quite right. So
Yeah.
I think you're always doing reviews back of your mind, like how best to present yourself. That's really what you're doing, right?
Yeah. And I think that brings up a good point because there's always a balance between, like as I was just saying, that one of the reasons people go to outdoor shows is they really want to meet the artist. Like the artist is a very integral part of the work. Like, although I think a lot of people would say that work should stand on its own, and obviously it should stand on its own to a certain degree. But the reason people come to an outdoor show to buy is because they want to know you, the artist. They want to know your process. They want to connect with you on a personal level, and then they connect to the work. So, I would sort of say err on the side of dealing with your customers and the people in your tent versus rehanging your booth. Like you have to have that balance, right? So a lot of times people will come in early the next day, rehang the booth because of they've sold and kind of with new work. But try not to have your back to the audience, I guess I would say, of the people coming in.
Yeah, so I think that goes into like the whole attitude and like I guess you have to look at what's the purpose of you being in that show. So I would just say, for me personally, I'd say I'm starting out as an artist. So I'm trying to build my network. So my goal isn't just to sell my work at a show. My goal is to get feedback. My goal is to build my audience, and my goal is to engage with people, with potential buyers, and then maybe sell my work. That's my goal.
Yeah.
The show. So I think another important part is to engage with people and to maybe get them to sign up for your newsletter. So an important thing to have in your booth, just as important as your pricing and your work and everything like that, is a book that people can actually share information with you. So it's good to have a guest book, and it's good to try to engage with people to get them to sign up so that you can continue that conversation, especially if it gets busy and you don't actually have the opportunity. And I always think back to when I started going to art shows and first starting to buy art, it might be intimidating. Not everybody coming to these art shows has bought art before, really knows what they like and what they want, and maybe isn't ready to buy today, but they might be ready to buy tomorrow. And I think that it's important to try to capture that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that that's kind of the bigger picture of marketing. So not only marketing pre the show, but also while you're there. And I totally agree with you, what you say. Like, I think a lot of it is, these art shows, these outdoor shows are stepping stones to building your audience and building your collectors and building your fan base and building your relationships with the community. And like I said before, I don't think you can really sell art. What you can do is you can facilitate an environment that allows people to be comfortable selling. And a lot of that comes after they've seen you at 7 or 8 shows and they've seen your newsletters. So I think it's also really important, and I've seen this many, many times, is that people will come to me, years later with a postcard that says, now I'm ready to buy. Now I want to do a commission. And they've got a postcard that I had at an outdoor show 3 or 4 years ago. So people keep those cards. And I think one of the biggest fallacies you can do is to kind of be restrictive about handing out your postcards. Like, I'm very happy if I've got rid of all of my postcards at the end of the show. And if that means some kids have picked them up, that's fine. I'm okay with that too, because those eventually get into the hands of your parents. But that's one of the easiest ways, I think, to kind of keep your name out there.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you. To try to promote yourself as much as possible at the show to build your audience and to continue the conversation. Somebody's just asking here, do you consider holds at these events? If so, for how long? Like if somebody came by and they're really interested in a piece. Kate, maybe you can speak more to that. My pieces have been
Sure.
Shows, so I haven't really.
Yeah, so what I do is, there's a couple of psychologies, I think, around the hold. Some people want to hold because you're one of the first artists they've seen, they haven't seen the show yet, and they want to make sure. Other people will use a hold as a bit of a psychology to weasel you down on the pricing. So that's kind of been my experience. So basically what I do is I kind of say, like, I will give you first right of refusal. So I'll put a blue dot on it and I'll say, if you give me your cell phone number, if someone else is interested in buying it, I'll call you. You can make the decision at that point if you're buying or not. And if I can't get a hold of you, then I'm going to sell it to the person that's in my booth. Yeah. I learned that lesson the hard way when I first started out. And this woman, I mean, she spent so much time in my booth and she so much loved it. And now I would recognize that that's someone who's very, very indecisive. And once they walk away, they're probably not ever going to come back for it. But it was a piece that I could have probably sold. And I held it until the last day of the show. And I was just stupid. So I won't do that again.
Right. Right.
I also do a lot of commissions though. And my commission policy is a 0 risk policy. So worst comes to worst and they come back and they're like, oh my God, I missed my phone call and now I've missed the piece. Then I can actually turn that into an opportunity to potentially do a commission for them.
Yeah, well, that's an important point because you can actually communicate that to the buyer too, right? Like you can say, well, you know what,
yeah.
if worst comes to worst and I do end up selling this, I'm happy to create another piece that's similar for you or something, right? Because they really needed it right away. And if they needed it immediately, they'd be buying it, right? They wouldn't.
Exactly.
At least put a deposit down, right? So.
Yeah. And I think, and people are nervous. Like I think, especially if you have large pieces, like I've had pieces that, that $3,000 or $4,000 pieces that sell at an outdoor show. So it's kind of like, that's a lot of money for anybody to buy. And so I do think that sometimes they need to think about it, and sometimes the wife loves it more than the husband, and there's a bit of conversation there. So I think that if they're upfront, you can talk it. But the reality too is that, like, I always say to them, like, I'm here to promote my work, and I'm happy to hold it if no one else is interested. But if someone else is interested, I just can't really hold it on the off chance that you may or may not buy it. And I don't want you to be in a situation where you're now feeling compelled to buy it because I've held it for you and I've potentially missed another sale.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think, and I just want to say something else about the building your audience and how you can sell post-event. Like, I just want to say that during these outdoor shows, there's a lot of artists who think, oh, the show wasn't that successful for me because I didn't sell that. I only sold 2 small pieces, right? Like, maybe you stood up outside for 2 days, and you're tired and you only sold 2 pieces and you're kind of disappointed, right? Maybe you didn't focus on building your network and you don't have a lot of people to follow up with. But I would just encourage you to do that because I don't know how many, like, I would say a high percentage of people, like a very high percentage of people, sell post-event, right? So they sell after the show closes, and they continue selling to those people. I know that happened to me with my shows. I've sold to people, more than like 3 times, right? So I think you need to never be discouraged about not selling at a show. And also, like Kate said, that people sometimes need to see you at a number of shows. So it's not really just one show successful and another one isn't. It's like, was your year successful? Was your, what's your 2-year plan and what's your 3-year plan? Like, this is an outdoor show. Yes, you have to like present yourself the best you can, but have a longer term vision around it. Because I know that definitely my larger pieces that I bought for my home, I've definitely, and there's people in the back of my mind I know I'm going to buy from one day. Like, I know that I've seen these artists and they're in the back of my mind that I'm going to want to buy from them one day. Right now, I'm not in the position to do that. And just as a note, for one of the art walks I was in, I had somebody call me about it, and I have this every year. I have people calling me about artists that they've seen years ago. But one time I had someone call me from an artist they saw like 4 or 5 years ago. And I was able to trace them down. She didn't know their name. She was able to explain to me their work, and we were able to trace them back, and she bought a big piece from this person. So I just, like, there's always opportunities with these shows that go way beyond the date of the show. Even 5 years.
Absolutely. No, yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. And I think often, especially the first show of the year, often is the one where people are coming out for the first time. So I found that for myself too, like, often it's the last show of the year, the outdoor show I do, that's the most successful one. But it doesn't really mean that that's the most successful show. It's that I've seen the same people at like 4 or 5 outdoor shows throughout the summer, and now they're ready to buy, which I think is really critical. Yeah.
So what should we talk about? Next.
Yeah, I was going to say something else on that. I just can't remember now. It's gone out of my head. It's like, woo, COVID brain, it's gone.
I have notes.
But even more, but the other thing too is I just want to say one of the other things that allows you to, it's unfortunate this person who had to reach out to you wasn't on that artist database, right? Where there would have been, building your database is super, super important for this stuff. And so if you're first starting out too, one of the best ways to do that is sometimes I would do like a little contest where I might do a giveaway for one small piece of art. And that will kind of allow people to not only just join my database and give me permission, but also they write clearly, so I actually have the email address that I can put into a system. I've been asked a lot of times too whether or not, well, why don't you just have an electronic version where they can just go directly into your MailChimp or whatever. I find that anything that's electronic in an outdoor show is just cumbersome. You have to watch them, and there's, especially now with COVID, there's sort of touching, so it's just way easier just to have a piece of paper or a book. I have a guest book that I've been using for years, where they put their names in there. Yeah. And in the back of that, I actually have my castle, security regulations if they're interested. Nobody really cares, but it's there.
Do the same. And I would say I've done that now for online shows as well as in-person shows. And I would say in person, that works better. But even online, I did like a contest, and that actually helped get some subscribers to my e-news as well. So definitely, I think, does help, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and just talking about newsletters too, like I think that absolutely there's a benefit to sending out newsletters. One of the biggest things that I hear in feedback is artists that are afraid of harassing people. And so they don't send out enough newsletters, or they don't follow up with commissions, or they don't follow up with people that are interested in their work. And I would say the biggest thing that I would give is that if your newsletters are interesting and they're not just about selling, but it's about what are you feeling, or the new work you're doing, or how you're surviving during COVID, or whatever, something that's kind of personal. If your newsletters are personal and they're interesting, people want to hear about them. And of course, it's an opportunity to kind of showcase your shows. With your emails and with people coming in and requesting more information, my philosophy is that I will continue to follow up until someone says no. And I don't know how many times people have said, oh, thank you so much for following up. I just lost the email. I got really swamped. I really want to move forward, but I needed you to keep reminding me. So that's pretty important to building that relationship and kind of maintaining and leveraging those contacts you meet at these shows into kind of future events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm still learning that with my audience, but that's what I tell everybody. I'm still learning the things I've told people to do for years and years. But maybe this is
well, it's always easier to say than to do, right?
This is a good segue to talk about if we're going to talk about promotion, like what you do before the show, what you do during the show, and what you do post the show.
Sure.
But like make sure we on some of the pieces that we might have missed. So I think like before the show, right now is the time before the beginning of the season is to print enough business cards, print postcards. Think about how you're communicating to people. So think about your print needs if you're going to be handing that out. I know it's COVID, but I think if you place them where people can just take one and they're just touching one, hopefully there's a clean way that we can do that. And then if you don't have a guest book, get a guest book, get pens, get disinfectant, get all those things that you need for in your booth. This is the time to go do your purchasing. But from a promotional standpoint, think about printing off postcards or little business cards. I know that some people do like bookmarkers because then people tend to keep them. And I have to say, I had one from Jamie McLean and I still use it in one of my
I've got a Mike Smalley one from like 10 years ago. Yeah.
I use it when I don't use my e-reader, when I'm using a physical book, it's still in my dresser. So I'm just saying, when people do hang on to those things. I don't know if there's anything else prior to the event that you'd need to print, but I know that.
Well, I think the other thing that's printing related is also around your packaging. So when someone buys a piece, how are you going to package it? What do you want it to look like? And so sometimes it's nice to maybe have a branded sticker for the tissue paper, or to, if you have a brown paper bag, to put your own sticker on it, or like a thank you card or something like that. So really think about the whole process from kind of beginning to end, including kind of the sale and the follow-up.
Yeah, I do think that that's really nice. Like I've bought art from people before. I'm like, oh, it's so nice. Like the way she packaged it, it was so nice. And maybe she didn't have to do that, but it was just a really nice, like it's almost more precious now. Like even the packaging and everything around it is precious. And I think that it's a really good way. It's still part of your brand if people walk away with something. So I do that.
Yeah.
I don't like to use plastic and things, so I use all paper. But I do buy stickers. They're small, but I do stick those on my my bags, right? Because I think it's a kind of a nice thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And so for most of my materials, like the other things I do is I print business cards, and I probably print about 7 or 8 different versions of the business cards. So each one at the front has the types of art or the pieces of art that I know tend to be ones that are really attractive. What that does, it helps people to kind of go through and say, oh, I really love this red piece in your booth, so I'm going to take your red business card. And it helps to kind of make that connection between you and the booth and what the card is. I also do that with my postcards because I work in a couple of different collections, so I'll do one postcard per collection. So again, if someone's interested in my Tranquility collection, they can pick up that postcard, and it makes a really clear connection between the art and the postcard, because at the end of the day, they're probably going to have 100 postcards, 100 business cards, and you want to be able to kind of figure out which ones work.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I don't think there's a lot of artists that do that, but I did learn that from you. I think that's awesome. Like you can different colors.
And it's not that much more expensive.
No, it's not. Really, postcards aren't very expensive at all. Like so I use
Vistaprint.
Yeah,
Vistaprint.
I use Vistaprint, and they always have this 40% off sale at some point, and that's when I
get
stuff from them. So
yeah, me too.
So I don't know if we're talking now about packing stuff or if we're still talking about promotion. Like
probably promotion. I just wanted to mention that just because I think it's something people forget. So it's important to remember.
So I guess prior to the event, you're taking a look at your lists again, your e-news and stuff like that. You're going to start promoting that like a couple of weeks before the event. And even there's a lot of shows that are doing like, I got accepted in, like you can even start promoting events now and buzz around the event like quite quite a bit before the event even. But when you want to start,
Yeah.
better is when, Kate, like about like when do you send out, when do you start talking about a show with your audience? I know at the bottom of your newsletter you might say upcoming events and on your website. So you're also on your website.
Yeah, so I try and update my website as soon as I know, and I always add a graphic to it. And I have a section on my newsletter which does have upcoming events, and so there's usually probably the next 5 or 6 events I have. So some of those events might be 6 months from now, and then I usually will promote the ones in my newsletter that are coming up within the month.
Within the month.
So whatever one is coming up next is the one I'll kind of feature, and then the other ones will be kind of smaller. But that at least allows people to, conventional marketing used to be, when I was in marketing 1,000 years ago, that you had to touch a client 9 times before they would make an action. I think it's now up to 17. So if you think about that, and you think about having to do a couple of newsletters, and maybe they see your social media, maybe they drive by your house and see a banner, like 17 touch points is a lot of touch points. Right. For them to break through the clutter and make that decision. Oh yeah, I like Kate's work. I'm going to go shut myself down to Jimmy Simpson Park and look at her work in the outdoor show. Right. So, I think that you can't really overdo it.
Yeah, I do know that those newsletters are important overall for the entire show as well, for all artists. So you're not just promoting yourself, you're promoting the show. So I would say, don't forget to promote the show, only because you want people to know where to go and where to find you. And you're also part of a community that's supporting each other. So if everybody's doing that and promoting the show, you're going to get visitors from your neighbor's booth. They're going to get visitors from your booth. Do you know what I mean? Like you're going to share, share an audience. And that's really what these outdoor shows really do. They help everybody collaborate in basically the art buying audience or the art interest audience. And so it's like, definitely promote the show, because I know for sure people are more comfortable, they often going to a show like that than going to your studio and engaging with you personally and using up all your time personally, because then they feel like there's a lot of pressure to buy. And so when you're in an outdoor show, there's way less pressure for the buyer. And fun event. So it's definitely a good thing to promote.
Yeah, and I think that's especially important on social media. Like each show will give you the hashtags that they're using. So use their hashtags. Like it's better not to make up your own, right? So you get benefit in numbers if everybody uses the same hashtag.
Right.
Excuse me. And the hashtag is important as well as the @ sign or whatever. But the other thing that I think is nice too is to help promote other artists in the show as well. Like I might kind of go, super excited to do the Riverdale Art Walk, and honored to be part of this group that includes Morgan Jones and Angela Lane and blah, 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 like all these other people, and you tag them as well. That's really important in a story because it makes it really easy for that person to share it in their story. If you tag the show, it's easy for the show then to retag your story, which gets you out to a whole other audience. So be generous. I think that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of times you see people that are frustrated that nobody came to their booth. I'm like, so what kind of marketing did you do? Well, I expected the show to do the marketing. I'm like, well, you can't do it all ourselves. Like you need to have a collaborative effort to kind of promote the show. And, like you say, someone might come from your mailing list and buy from your neighbor, but equally someone else's mailing list is going to come buy from you.
Yeah, I mean, the show could do the marketing and it would cost you $10,000 to be at the show.
Yeah.
like remember, these outdoor shows are actually very cost effective for you to be part of, and it's because we're part of a collaboration of like it's a big group of people, right, that are promoting the show all together. So definitely be generous, and also make it easy for other people to promote you. So I always say, like, there's artists that like, oh, like I didn't get nobody reposted my post or whatever, like nobody forwarded my post, the organization didn't whatever, and I'm like, well, did you use our hashtags? Like, was it easy to find you? Like, did you use our hashtags? Did you tag us? And also these shows are always also trying to keep healthy accounts, so they're only going to be able to do so much, so you have to do it often, and then eventually one of yours will get posted and tagged or like shared out. So like just be generous and be patient and make it easy for people to share your content.
That's right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. Oh, okay. So we're down to about 5 minutes. So I'm just trying to think what else we need to talk about. What about, pricing? I think we should talk a little bit about money. Like I understand that not everything is about selling the work. It's about making relationships, but you also really need to feel once you go in there that you're really comfortable with your pricing. And this is something, especially as an emerging artist, if you haven't quite figured out what your pricing is, now is the time to do it. Not when you're at the show and someone asks you if they can get a deal, right? So I think you want to give yourself some time to live with your pricing and be comfortable with it. Most artists will create their pricing on a square inch basis. So 36 inches by 36 is whatever square inches times $1 a square inch, whatever it ends up being. Obviously, for the smaller ones, you need to modify that so that you can cover your costs, because that doesn't make sense. But with that, you have to be kind of comfortable with your pricing. If you're just starting out, it's better to start a little bit lower so you can kind of sell and get a sense of the audience, because you don't have yet that brand awareness or that reputation. It's much easier to kind of gradually put your prices up. It's just a bit of a death knell to put your prices down. You never really want to be in a position where you're forced to do that.
Right.
So think about that.
To be constantly discounting your work, right?
Yeah, it's not good.
And one thing that comes into play with pricing as well is if you have galleries or if you have other people like galleries showcasing your work, is you want to keep that pricing consistent across the board, because you don't want to undercut your galleries, right? And that gallery you're running.
Absolutely.
Really important. They're working really hard for you, and you definitely don't want to undercut that pricing even at these outdoor shows. Like, it's not an appropriate thing to do.
No. And one of the things you should have to think about, because you never really want to be kind of deer in the headlights as a client is standing there and asking you, like, do you do discounts? Do you do commissions? What do you charge for commissions? What is your process for that? Do you deliver? Do you charge for delivery? There's a whole bunch of things like that. That's better if you have some time to think about it. And again, sort of live with it for a bit and be comfortable with it. So when someone asks you those questions, you're not like, oh, I don't know what to say. And you might I will often, I'll sometimes do a discount if they're buying multiples, if it's a client who's bought from me before. But I really try hard not to do a lot of negotiating and discounting, because it does set up a precedent that they won't buy your work at full price. They'll wait for the sale. So you don't really want to do that.
Well, I think I had a lot more tips and stuff written down here, or like.
Oh, yeah, me too.
So maybe I could just encourage people, if you're part of the Art Walks from the Artist Network, to join our orientation, and we'll go through those systematically as well.
Yeah, and also I would say join like some of these member groups. So the Artist Network has a group for artists that are doing the Riverdale Art Walk and Art Walk in the Square. I know Toronto Outdoor does. Within those artist communities, a lot of the questions that you have been asked 1,000 times before. So there will definitely be, the community will be able to kind of help you out with some of that stuff too. Or reach out to us as well. I'm going to post this on my Instagram and Facebook and YouTube channel. And so in any of those places to ask the questions, and we'll try and answer them as much as we can. So I think we're just about out of time. So either I've lost you or you've lost me. I don't know.
Yeah, you specific questions.
Okay. All right. Bye.
All right. I was just going to say, if they have specific questions.
All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. I think they might have been my Wi-Fi. I don't know. It's just terrible. Sometimes at the cottage it's unpredictable. Anyway, so I will post this, and thank you so much for joining us. And next week we've got Hanan Fayed, so hopefully you can join us for that. And have a fabulous week.